From I Am Interchange, this is the Hatch podcast series.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. What do we mean when we talk about systems change? And what systems do we seek to change? Systems change seeks to identify the underlying cause of social, economic, environmental, political, and cultural problems by uncovering the root factors, beliefs, structures, policies, and perspectives that keep them in place and in power. Much like integrated medicine, it's a holistic approach that addresses the disease rather than the symptoms. Once dysfunctional systems are identified and dismantled, community collaborators build diverse, resilient systems to take their place. I'm Tate Chamberlin, and in this podcast I host John Kania, Executive Director of Collective Change Lab, David Purkey, Latin American Regional Director at the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and San Rahi, Executive Vice President for Global Brand Innovation, Sid Lee, as they discuss the complexity of transformative systems change, an urgent global agenda, and how love may in fact be all we need. We're in Mexico. Join us, won't you? John, will you tell me a little bit about the project that brought you to Hatch?
Well, for me, so my work is, I have an organization called the Collective Change Lab, and our focus is supporting organizations and collectives around the world and working together in mutually reinforcing ways. So that could be, working with K through 12 education system in Boston, Massachusetts, and that involves the districts and the school district that's there, and after school programs and faith-based organizations and businesses in the area. Everybody who sort of touches, the quote unquote system. And so our work as the Collective Change Lab is to figure out how to support all those organizations and individuals and the community together in working in a transformative way. And so that's my work. And coming here was just an opportunity to connect with other sort of like-minded kindred spirits who in particular are heart-centric in their approach to thinking about social change.
How about you, David?
We'll have to ask Yaro why we're all here. He seems to be the master alchemist. I suspect that something about the work we do at the Stockholm Environmental Institute, where I'm the Latin America Center Director. We're a think tank research institute focused on issues related to sustainable development in general. And we're actually quite involved in the work prior to 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals were being articulated and supporting the thinking around that, and have now pivoted to thinking about how to support implementation of the SDGs and tools to help support that. So I think that might be what have caught his attention. So,
San?
I think we understandably overlap to some extent and have our differences. I mean, my background is as a growth strategist for brands, helping brands grow, but also helping them understand what they're going to be in the future, which I know sometimes sounds like an odd comment, but brands tend to have a very long view of themselves. And I think what really sort of I have in mind coming to Hatch is sort of an understanding that we, in order to have meaningful and accelerated impact, we really need a way to sort of connect, market systems, human behaviors, and and some of the larger policies and institutions that are sort of controlling some of the macros around us. And I'd say the project that brought me here is really trying to find a way to meaningfully intersect those three quite different operating systems.
John, you spoke yesterday, and I sometimes try to explain systems change to my mom, and I was wondering if you could kind of help reframe that and help me explain systems change to my mom, and feel free to add on to it.
Yeah, well, systems change is one of those things. When I was talking yesterday, I asked how many people had sort of heard of systems change, and most everybody in this crowd sort of raised their hands, and then the question is sort of how can you actually describe this to your mother? And I think for many of us, we sort of have a general sense of what systems change is all about, but it kind of falls apart when we try to make it clear, and that's been sort of a mission of mine over the last decade or so, is to make systems change clear to the people who actually want to do it, practitioners who are in the soup doing the work. And the definition that we actually borrowed from an organization called Social Innovation Generation in Canada was that systems change is about shifting the conditions that hold the problem in place. Shifting the conditions that hold the problem in place. And when I first came across that, I thought, wow, I finally found a way that I could describe it to my mother, in a way that felt visceral to me, that went from, hearing things in my head to feeling it in my heart. And, for me, it was just a big game changer in terms of just opening up. And, Einstein once said, let's be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And that, to me, characterizes that way of thinking about it, shifting the conditions that hold the problem in place.
I got to systems change through systems analysis, really, sort of thinking about problems as systems and applying the tenets of systems analysis as a mathematical and scientific field, particularly focused on water resources and water resource and water management systems. And then once you've figured out how to describe the system and its function, then I think you can start to look at, okay, how can we improve this system, and where are the places we can intervene and make changes and move the system to a new state. So I think that's the key insight, is that we need to move the systems we have, which once we've described how they function, if applied some of that thinking, figuring out how to effectively move them to better states. So for me, that's systems change is the next level of systems analysis.
Well, I mean, I'm still struggling to explain to my mother what I do for a living, so I'm not sure if I can do systems change, but, I think I certainly, just as a build, I suppose, I think, as a marketer, I think what's interesting about, systems going from, an individual human, behavior to their relationships and all the way out to, societies and governments. I think what's interesting is each of those layers have actually a different perspective on what that change could be. And so I suppose I would frame systems change around coalition of perspectives.
Yeah, somebody I admire greatly, a woman named Brenda Zimmerman, who passed away a couple of years ago. She's Canadian, and is a great complexity theorist. And she always said that the most important unit of analysis in a system is not the part. By that I mean the individual or the organization or the institution. It's the relationships between the part. And I think we often forget that, because it's a lot easier to focus on the person or the institution than the relationships that are actually going on. And so another way to think about systems change, it's about shifting the relationships that exist in the system so that they work in a more equitable and just way.
I totally agree with that. I think the most important part of systems change is defining the problem space. And like you said, what's holding the problem in place? What are the conditions that are holding the problems in place? To do that, you got to define the problem shed. That's how I refer to it, like the watershed or the air shed. It's the problem shed. What is the problem shed, and what are the key components, and what has to be on the table as you're trying to move that to a new state?
And I wonder if you find this, David, when you're sort of like, at Hatch, we've been engaging with the community, with each other, and talking about some of the issues that we're solving through our work. And what I've observed is a lot of people's problem statements also have a diagnosis in them. They also have a solution in them in some cases. I wonder if you find that, and I wonder if that's somewhat what's perpetuating the need for change, is that we've gotten to a point where biases are so embedded that we don't realize that they're there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to try to separate the solutions from the problem definition. or else that's, sort of biases the whole exercise. Right. But I do think there is a tendency for people to come to the exercise with their own preconceived notion of what a solution should be. And not every actor in that problem shed has the same idea. So that's where a lot of times where conflict comes from. So being able to let people define the problem together first and then try to think about solutions is important, and not preordaining what the solution might be. And I speak from the perspective of someone pursuing system change in a very specific context, which is water, sustainable water resources management. So I don't know how much these are applicable insights to other problem sheds. But.
Well, and I think there are many, fascinating perspectives here and people doing really interesting projects. And I think the thing that I always need to remind myself of is that I'm not separate from the system. I'm part of the system. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm engaging in systems change, I have to be a part of that work too. So I've got to go through some level of change myself if the system's actually going to change in the direction that I want it to. And I think that's really hard to remember, because it's like, I want to create change on that system out there. But you're a part of the system. Once you engage with it, you're part of the system.
Mm-hmm. It's like prefigurative, living how you see the future, like living in the future you want.
Yeah, I've never heard that word prefigurative, but I like it. In effect, it's be the change you want to be, as Gandhi said. That's often harder to do, I find, personally, than one would think it is, to actually act in the way that you're hoping to create.
How do you describe the systems that we are currently in, other than a disaster? I mean, maybe it is.
The phrase is well used at this point that, most of our systems are broken, right? And then the flip side of that is most of our systems are maybe not broken, but they're doing exactly what they were designed to do. In fact, many of our systems in the Western world were designed by white men of privilege to serve white men of privilege. And so the fact that there are poorer outcomes for, BIPOC people or people that have been marginalized and are being marginalized in some ways, whether or not it's transgender or gay people or others, that in fact the system is designed to marginalize them. But either way, I think, we're living in a world where institutions and the systems themselves, and the systems are made up of people, are breaking down all around us. Because by and large, most of them were designed by people over the last 500 years with a Western colonial mindset. And they worked well for a certain segment of people through the industrial age. Mm-hmm. But the world is changing, and just in terms of our composition, and it's becoming much more apparent that, these are not the sort of institutions and systems that will carry us into the future. So in a word, they're broken.
I describe the systems we're in as concentric. And again, I tend to start with the individual. I mean, I suppose that's my work and my training, putting planetary systems on the outer edge and putting humans in the middle. But, I think that what you just described can give us a reason why they can go so badly so quickly. Because if you've got a bias in a concentric system, it affects all layers essentially at the same time, right?
But also this morning you mentioned planetary boundaries as the other extreme from the individual, right? And I think the other reason they're not working is because we're approaching some of those planetary boundaries. And so, these systems were built with the assumption of infinite resource availability, and when you start hitting the boundaries of some of those, then you start getting into failure zones of some of these systems beyond the sort of Eurocentric sort of focus of some of these systems. I think there's both of those components are at play. So.
Yeah, well, in effect, we say sometimes that systems are helpful fictions, because there is no such thing as the educational system or the healthcare system, that the two are separate. So we try to find ways or pockets of relationships and talk about that as a system. But everything's related to everything, and it is one whole. So when it starts to break down in one place other parts are affected. And the reverse is true, which is what we need as a hope for humanity, is that when parts of the system start to flow and get into harmony, other parts of this is how nature works. Other parts of the system are attracted to that and want to get into flow and into harmony. I mean, I think it's one of the fallacies of the sort of the industrial age way of thinking about systems, that all we want to do is scale, scale, scale. We want to scale certain interventions, et cetera. That is not shifting the system. That is not changing the system. That is not bringing the system into more harmony. So, yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with you when it starts to break down one place. So even start, as you said, starting with the individual, every other part of the system will be affected.
But that integration was actually the logic behind the Agenda 2030 and trying to think about the Sustainable Development Goals as an integrated whole, right? That's the way they were conceived and designed, was that none of these things can happen unless all of these things happen, right? So that was one of the insights that informed the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. Whether that's happening in its implementation or not is another question, but I think that insight was there when they were developing the agenda.
I think the visual that people most commonly have of the SDGs is the sort of periodic index of the SDGs, which I find, and you know, with all respect to the designers, I think I know who they are as well, but I find it like utterly unhelpful, because you have to intellectualize every single one of them equally. But then there's these decoders, these sort of system decoders, where you go, no, actually, this is all about, you know, biosphere, and then economy, and then society, and then economy. Like, it's really just three things.
Have you seen the wedding cake reconfiguration of that?
I was going to ask you if your favorite.
Yeah, the wedding cake
rendition.
reconfiguration of the SDGs, I think, is one helpful way to do it, where there's the ones that relate to the environment are the bottom tier, and then the ones that relate to social systems are the middle tier, and the ones that relate to economic systems and goals are the top tier.
I didn't see that until recently. Did someone readapt the organization of it?
I don't exactly know where it came from, but it was, there's the typical circle SDG lapel pin that somebody unpacked and sort of reorganized. I think it came out of maybe UNDP because they wanted to emphasize how important, or UNEP, the environment program, because they wanted to emphasize how important these basic environmental goals and objectives were. So it was biased in that respect to sort of give prominence to the environmental goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ongoing challenge with like the SDGs as it relates to systems is this whole question of, and so that's a step forward, the wedding cake, in sort of trying to demonstrate the relationality, if you will, of the SDGs to each other, as opposed to putting them in a periodic chart. Anything we can do that helps us get and understand and make meaning of the relationality is really super helpful. And yet it's really hard to describe something that's holistic, right? And so how do you, I mean, somebody here at Hatch this morning said, you need to compartmentalize before you can bring things together. I was intrigued by that. I wasn't so sure I agreed with it, but there is this sort of, you have to bring it to a place that you can understand it so you can start to make progress. And I would, maybe by the time we get to 2050, hopefully we'll have even a better articulation that really shows the relationality. But I think we're just learning that, right? We're learning it. And the important news is that I think with any systems change work is that you continue to learn, because you don't know how things come out. So I love that. I think that's
in my
great.
work in systems analysis and defining the problem shed, I've collaborated with a lot of people, and I find there's joiners and there's splitters. So when you're trying to develop a shared conceptual model of a system, some people have a tendency to want to split it up into all its finest detailed parts, and other people are like, no, let's join these things together for clarity and simplicity. And I think part of negotiating systems change with a group of actors is identifying the joiners and the splitters and negotiating between them how refined the conceptual model of the system needs to be. So,
David, when you talk about problem shed, you're talking about current state, future state, and reasons to go there. Is that how you describe it, or?
Yeah, I mean, my entry into this is, again, through the lens of, thinking about water management and watersheds, where there's various actors and various interest groups, and there's a resource base that decisions need to be made about. And, that watershed exists in a global climate system, too. So is the problem shed the global climate system, or is the problem shed defining the boundaries of a watershed and making sure the right actors are in the room? This gets into the joiners and the splitters, right? The joiners would say the whole thing's about the big climate system and everything else is lumped into that. But yeah, that's what I mean, is like, where's the boundary of the problem, right? And in this very specific example, and I'm sorry I can't bring other examples, this is where I spend my intellectual life, but in this particular example is like, is the climate system out of the systems analysis and it's beyond our control as a group of decision makers, or is it inside of our system that we can intervene and act upon it? And that question is part of defining the problem shed, in my experience.
So there's a YouTube video of Eric, and I apologize, Eric, if you ever hear this video, because I can't remember your last name, but I was so affected by this video. And he was talking about simplicity on the other side of complexity. And the example that he was talking about, which I read about at the same time, was back when, this was early on when the United States was in Afghanistan and they were trying to do sort of nation rebuilding and stuff. And somebody in the military intelligence had put together a systems map, which many have seen, how things are all connected. And it was so confusing that, the general looked at it, just said, PowerPoint makes us stupid. And I remember seeing that in the New York Times. But Eric's speech, Eric Berlow, Berlow, and Eric's speech was, how do you figure out, how far out to go? And, I'm not remembering exactly, but I think his key conclusion was, think about degrees of separation. If it's more than 2 degrees of separation from where you are in terms of your ability to impact it, then it may be part of the system, but you're never going to be able to make any progress if you try to figure out degrees 3 and 4 of separation.
I think it's really helpful to divide those factors into the ones that you can control, and the ones that you can't. Because the ones that you can control are the interventions or actions or strategies that you can contemplate. And when I say you, I mean the group of people who are in this problem shed together trying to move the system. These are the things you have to evaluate is, can we do these and what would be their impact? The other things are uncertainties and they're risks, and they could happen or they couldn't. And the question is how, if we choose to act in this way, how would that perform in the face of this range of uncertainties that we don't control, right? That are outside of our control.
David, do you separate climate? Because when I think about the SDGs, I think that none of it matters if we don't get climate under control. Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
Yeah, I guess. Sure, that's really an important one. I mean, if the climate system continues to go, like you said, we're on track for a 3.6 by the end of the century at current rates. None of the strategies that we currently have in mind are going to make a good system change in the face of 3.6 degrees warming, right? But yeah, I think it's again, what can you mentally handle with the group of people who are inhabiting this space together and trying to find a solution, and what's inside and what's outside. And that's a very important first step in systems change work, I think, is defining that.
And I think another important thing is that you will not get it completely correct when you sit down to do that analysis. Not you, David, but the group will not get it completely correct. And that you're going to need to continue to revisit. And I say, when you're doing systems change work, if you aren't continually surprised, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you're going to miss stuff. And if you don't start to figure out what are the things that you're missing, then that means you're sort of more in a static state of sort of taking, and so if you're constantly in this state of surprise, it means that you're listening well, you're sensing where, things are headed. And figure out that first map of what's going on, the problem shed, but recognize it's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You think also that we need to change the way, because I feel like often we can, Tate, you sort of invited 3 nerds into a podcast, so this is,
that was my intention, very much so.
I feel like we can have an epic conversation without using the word outcome. And look, let's talk about it. There's 4 blokes sitting on a podcast. That's an outcome of a system.
4 guys
no
instead
judgment.
of having a female.
Yeah, I mean, that's an outcome of a system. No judgment. I'm not trying to make a statement by that, but let's recognize some of these outcomes. And I wonder how we check ourselves, to remind ourselves that, as you started off with, John, systems hold, I think you called them conditions, but maybe outcomes is a similar thing. That's essentially what they do, and sometimes we get lost in the design and lose touch with the implications.
Yeah, and again, I also think what's really important is if you are sort of coming from outside the system. San, what you presented this morning, I just thought was so wonderful. You were talking about the fact that sort of the development paradigm for years had been about sort of the expertise coming from mostly the global north into the global south and sort of bringing the answers. And that the answers were there, in community, and that really, the opportunity was to help surface those and help people who were actually coming up with really novel and interesting solutions that never would have happened from anywhere else. And so, that's one example, I think, of what you're talking about, that, we have these biases, and we should always check ourselves and try to get better at our blind spots. But we also recognize if you really want to get a full picture of the system, then you need to make sure you've got people who are representative of the system, and in particular, those that are most impacted.
I think even the Agenda 2030 suffers from that, not the exact same development paradigm from the rich north to the poor south, because it was a global agreement and all the countries of the world were there, but it was about negotiations between countries, really, and those goals are going to happen and change. That change is going to happen at smaller levels than a global agenda and national commitments to that global agenda. And really getting down to change at the local level would be that household or the town or the county or the state. And I think one of the big challenges with getting to the goals in the Agenda 2030 is really driving the initiative down to the local level, to the communities and to the local government. And that's an area that we're starting to explore, is how do you take this global agenda and push it down to where the action is. But again, that was still a very top-down thinking, right? We've got to continue to push this down to the local level. And what you presented this morning was that there's already things bubbling up from the bottom. And connecting those things is going to be really important. And that has a lot to do with communication and storytelling and messaging. Yeah. So,
and maybe you're pointing out something that I think you both know better than me, but even the ratification of the global goals, we're in this interesting place, right, where we have market systems, let's say, market and institutional systems that created growth, economic growth, that led to massive amounts of carbon being released. And now those same countries that have benefited from that economic growth are asking newer economies that are trying to do exactly the same system growth to not do that on behalf of the planet. So it's sort of like the problem causers are now the police. And that's an interesting
and even more weird, the system that you described, which was, northern dominated, white male dominated, created the UN in the first place, which then sort of approved this agenda, right? So one could argue that the agenda itself came out of that same failed system, but how far do you want to take that?
Well, yeah, I'll take it a little further. That's great. Yeah, it does, start and end with worldview, which we found out at this point isn't working for us. 10 years ago, it would never have occurred to me to say, okay, it's kind of stupid to put social problems and environmental problems. They're holistic. The two are the same. You can't separate the two. And I think if you go outside of any sort of Western colonial-dominated culture, if we go into, indigenous wisdom or even spiritual, Eastern and Western spiritual practices, those that haven't been influenced by, the last 500 years of Western domination, things aren't separated. You don't find
the wedding cake.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have the environment separate from social problems. They never thought about. Thousands of years ago, they never thought about the two as different because that's what they were living.
What do you each believe is the most urgent, personally?
The easy answer is the climate one. I think the pandemic has showed that we're sort of on the precipice of multiple sort of challenges, and biodiversity and global health.
Water.
Yeah. So, but I think that's maybe what the SDGs were trying to get at in there, the integrated whole, right? That you can't make progress on one of them unless you make progress on all of them.
Isn't that overwhelming, though? How do we simplify the urgency?
Maybe I'm sidestepping your question, or maybe I'm trying to just answer from a different angle. But because, I do, if you think about systems, global systems, or planetary systems, all the way down to communities as concentric balloons, if you squeeze the outside one, you're squeezing the inside one at the same time. But I think what's needed urgently is acceleration. And I think whatever systems can create acceleration overcome inertia, certainly, but I think we're even beyond overcome inertia. I think we need to have acceleration. So whatever systems can create that are the most urgent. From my perspective, that's markets. But that's also my bias, but from my perspective, that's markets.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I sort of feel like, I think the SDGs, the intention of the SDGs was to say, you know, we've got all these people working on a bunch of different stuff, but we got to get together and, you know, people working together will do better than people working separately. And as you said, David, earlier, I think we're, as a society, falling far short of the working together part. And so to me, the SDGs are fine as a set of goals, but it's how we're trying to achieve them, how we're trying to achieve systems change. Because what I see is that there continues to be too much focus, and again, I think this is a sort of Western rational mindset, on technologies, and on, you know, program interventions that can scale, and there's too little focus on what's the worldview that actually is going to work for us. That, you know, I think has to include a process that, you know, addresses the fact that every human being on the planet is traumatized, and people are traumatized, and systems are traumatized. And until we actually move those systems from trauma to healing, we are going to continue to get blocked.
John, do you think there needs to be a shared worldview that otherwise we can't make the system change, or can the system change accommodating separate worldviews and conceptual models of what?
Well, I mean, the reality is it's not like we could get one worldview overnight even if we wanted it.
Yeah.
But I do think that, you know, the way that, this is a personal point of view, so not everybody shares it, but that the way that we will make progress as a society is there will be certain pockets of thinking in a different way about the need for healing, about the need for love. This is not set aside rational thinking, rational work, coming up with programs, but the part that's missing in my mind from the SDGs on the how side is really a very different, more holistic, more relational way of achieving these.
There is no happiness or love SDG, right? So
no, and that again, it's in the how of every single one SDG. It's not its own SDG, and that we need fundamentally different ways of going at this. So I think there will be pockets of people who are, and there are today, they're just really, really small and they're on the margins, of people who are approaching social and environmental problem solving in a very different, transformative way. Mm-hmm. I think where we're on a path right now in terms of how we go at this is at best incremental. And yet we have this incredible impatience for scale, and then we've got to go fast and we've got to accelerate. But we're using a world view of this mechanistic world that's, you know, the way that we accelerate is by getting technologies and programs out there faster. And that's not going to get us where we need to go.
There seems to be a recognition that we need to go somewhere.
Yeah.
That's increasingly sort of the common shared narrative, that we need to go somewhere. And I think that's an important incremental step, like you referred to. And I think that 10 years ago, there was that voice of we need to change, we need to go somewhere. It was not as strong as it is now, I don't think.
Yeah, to answer your point about worldviews, I don't feel like you can have a singular worldview. I don't either. It feels like a very scary world, frankly. But I think you can have aligned incentives.
Yeah.
And you know, I take a lesson from the brand space. Every great brand has a strong worldview, and it's a strong worldview that's supported, that rallies people. But strong brands tend, and because they're brands, they tend to be positive worldviews by definition. But they tend not to negate each other. You know, they stake a place, they stake a white space without negating the other. So, have you guys read Simon Sinek's new book, The Infinite Game? I think it's called. You know, I think quite often worldviews are zero sum, and I suppose to your question, as soon as you have one zero sum worldview, it can be the only one. That's its design, but potentially if we have multiple, you know, as Simon Sinek would say, infinite worldviews that allow for the presence of others. Because I think you're exactly right. MIT's got this, for me, amazing tool called En-ROADS. I think it's available publicly, and you can, you know, go in and pull all the levers of industry and policy and technology and innovation and farming and see what it does to see what those outcomes look like.
It's a great model.
And there is no way to build a solution that doesn't require this exotic dance between technology and policy and behavior change. There's no way to build a solution. And how are we going to get this like exotic coordination? It's going to have to be through some flow of incentive throughout all those three.
Yeah, and recognizing that this is not the prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
Right? Then that this is not a zero-sum game by definition, because we can have collaboration and there is information. I mean, the foundation of the zero-sum game is the prisoner's dilemma, where there is no collaboration and there is no information. So to the degree that we have those two things, information to inform and support collaboration, this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game or the prisoner's dilemma. But I do agree that we're probably stuck with people coming to this effort with different worldviews and different definitions of what success looks like, and we need to find solutions that can make people who hold those different definitions satisfied that the shift and the change is successful.
Well, let me give you a hypothetical. Actually, it's not a hypothetical, but a specific. There's retributive justice and there's restorative justice. Retributive justice is we punish, and restorative is that we find a way to sort of make amends and make sure the victim, feels like they were sort of, addressed, their harm was addressed, and often restorative justice, quite often, if not always, is in community. So the community is a part of that. Retributive justice is let's lock them up, right? Those are two different worldviews. I think we can sustain multiple worldviews, but I'd like to think that we're going to move as a society more towards restorative justice, which doesn't say there aren't times when, whoever, did the harm actually, there's always a way that they have to make up for it, but, locking them up is not the answer. So I think there's an evolution towards love of worldviews that has to take place for us to get out of the muck that we're in. It's not to say that everybody's going to be thinking the same on all things, but I do think when it comes to how we think about sort of solving these major problems that, we're going to let love in. We just have to, or we're screwed.
Who do you think the resistors are?
I mean, there's plenty of stakeholders that are profiting from status quo immensely, massively, and maybe they've got another plan of what they're going to do with all that profit in 150 years' time. But I don't know. I feel like we're still in the inertia stage of this. Personally, I think there's a lot of resistance throughout.
I said earlier, I think it's that inertia is breaking down. Do you agree that it is? Or if you say we're still in the inertia phase, are we about ready to leave it? Or are we still...
I mean, I feel it is because I think there's a new... Like, urgency is a different energy to need. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we're sort of like the needle like shifted slightly, and it just creates a different dynamic. And so I do agree that it's breaking down. I know I sound massively pessimistic. I'm not that...
You said you're from London, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just in London. But I do think there's a different energy that's like creating that breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's resistance, and then there's not knowing. As an example, I think financial markets and technology markets have done amazing things for humanity, and they're also the cause of a lot of what we're seeing. And a lot of times it's because I don't think the people that come up with the financial products or the technology products are connected with the harm and the impact that they're creating. They're removed by so many levels. And so it's great, we can make more money on them, and they don't see the harm that they're creating. And so, I think that, part of, so there's the not knowing, and then there's awakening to what's going on. This is what I mean when I talk about sort of how worldviews can shift, and we talked a little bit yesterday about mental models. And, there are a couple different ways you can actually shift mental models, but to me, the most powerful is you help people have a different experience than they have today. That we often tend to believe that we think our way into a new way of doing, that if we understand something differently, then we'll act differently. But I think more often the most powerful way that we shift our mental models is that we act our way into a new way of being. And we had a great example yesterday of that was given to us of a gentleman who was involved in a restaurant that was supporting people who were more marginalized, and they would come in and volunteers would come out and serve them. And this one volunteer came out and he realized he was serving an employee of his. And he went from not giving living wage to his employees to giving a living wage. So that was an experience that he had that caused him to shift his mental model in ways that he hasn't. So to me, I think we can talk about incentives, but I think when your awareness changes and your mental model changes, you see the world differently and you act differently. And to me, I think that's a critical part of what we as a society need to go through.
What does that look like? You brought it up yesterday. Will you guys explore with me how we shift mental models?
I'm going to ask San to give us his perspectives as a marketer and advertiser.
Yeah, it's just called TikTok. No, I mean, let's use more kind of human terms than tax and incentive. But I think that, as you were talking, John, I jumped on your question and said that there's lots of people that are profiting from status quo. But I think those same people would also happily embrace innovation if they were profiting from it. So I don't know that it's like a cardinal choice to keep the planet as it is, or it's a cardinal choice to keep their firm or their institution profitable. And so maybe, certainly I think broadening what value means is a way to shift mental models, broadening a sense of value and helping, to your point, helping people understand what they don't see, not because they're evil or indisciplined, or they just simply don't see it, and helping them understand that what's outside of their value arc can still be value, and it actually could be quite new and interesting value, and potentially even greater value than the value that they already capture. But I do think that a lot of very, very large, very resource-rich organizations that you could argue are the evil are actually all of a sudden seeing this tremendous value in shifting towards EV as a platform.
Well, I'll pick up on EV if you want to drop it.
No, but I mean, that's an example of, on the one hand, you can look at auto and say, they're the villain here, and they have every incentive to keep. They've invested in ICEs and they've invested in fossil fuels for all this time. They've got every incentive to keep it. But they're also the ones that have created, the most thermally efficient engine that we've ever created. But they're also the ones that are saying, as soon as we know how to manufacture, organize, maintain profitably, an infrastructure for EVs, they're going to shift. They're going to shift impact greater than any of us.
And they're going to go fast, and they're already going.
Yeah.
I mean, the demand for strategic minerals is already sort of going up dramatically. The challenge is the narrative around that, and I think you were kind of getting at this, right? Is that that's the narrative? We've success, right? We've transformed our transportation fleet to EV, and we now have this zero carbon economy, and we can go forward with good. That's narrative of success. But our institute is really getting into what's happening at the places where those strategic minerals are mined, and what's happening in terms of environmental impacts and social impacts. And, the consumer can just be there thinking, great, I got my electric vehicle, we're moving towards the zero carbon economy, climate crisis is on the road to solution, and be blind to the fact that it's just another extractive industry creating harm and damage at the place where the raw materials are extracted. And I think that's a really big challenge that has to be addressed and raised. So.
Yeah, you remind me, I was at Circular Economy Conference. The question that kept coming up in my mind was, is there even enough copper in the ground to electrify everything?
There's a lot of copper in the world. A lot of it's in Peru and Chile, in the Andes. And you can go to those places where copper is being pulled out now, and you can find conflict, and you can find hurt, and you can find pain that needs to be recovered, and you need communities that need to be constructed. But there's a lot of copper there.
We may well run out of the resources before we have time to innovate an alternative, and that's really interesting. But just going back to EV and worldviews, so I think if I look at it from a market perspective, EV started off with two competing but compatible worldviews. One was a worldview of a lightweight, small city vehicle, enough to get me from point A to point B and back, which in the US, which I think is probably indexes quite high globally, is under 50 miles in a day, right? It's under 80 kilometers in a day. And so let's build vehicles optimized for that majority use, not for every use, but majority use. And then there was another worldview, which is let's build EVs that essentially replace
Internal combustion.
what you're used to, which is at this point have become very large, 3 rows because we need baby seats and all that kind of stuff.
EV is electric vehicle.
Electric vehicle. Yes. Thank you. And when you get large, you get heavy because you need batteries, and also expensive. That means you need luxury and performance. And so we have these two worldviews, and one clearly took over, and it's leading to some of the issues that you're talking about, because the appetite for essentially the battery technology, some of these cars now have like twice as much battery resource as they really need.
But you raised this issue in your sort of concentric circles, from personal responsibility and behavioral choice out to policy and planetary boundaries. I think the risk is that that narrative of just replace the big SUV internal combustion engine with a battery that can move that same vehicle at the same performance is winning.
Yeah,
and it kind of absolves us of asking the questions about should we be consuming and living the same way we've lived in the past.
Exactly.
I think this energy transition is accelerating. I really do think that the train is leaving the station and the money is starting to flow towards it. It's going to happen, but if the narrative is once it's happened we're good, then I think we're screwed, because there's so much behind that, right? And should we really be thinking before we just decide to replace all of our internal combustion economy, carbon-based economy, with electric, with a zero carbon economy? Let's think about if the way we're living is the way we want to live, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Because if we don't think about that, we're going to just be going the path that you were alluding to.
And John, we were talking about market shaping yesterday, and that was a market shaping. It was a market reduction, because it didn't only knock out the worldview of small city vehicles, it knocked out hydrogen fuel cell.
Mm-hmm.
And there's $50 billion of investment that is sitting on a shelf at this point.
I could maybe go down the rabbit hole with you guys, but I'll try,
us out.
maybe another time.
Fish us out.
Just the question that you started with, Tate, was, how do we shift mental models? And we talked about sort of how we shift, worldviews through having different experiences. One other way would be just being in relationship with people differently, and people who have different perspectives. And obviously we're seeing the challenges of we're not in relationship, that we get this polarization. But when you are in relationship, that will affect your worldviews. This is why in Israel and Palestine, Seeds of Peace and other organizations bring young Palestinians and Israelis together so that they gain a relationship and they think differently about the issues and the problems that are happening. So, there are so many ways that if you can support people into getting into relationship differently, they will shift their worldviews. And it's another way to sort of think about shifting mental models.
Is there anything that is blowing your mind right now?
Listening to you three.
Yeah.
Yeah, guilt.
Guilt is blowing your mind?
Well, grappling with guilt, because I think we are all here in earnest. I think we're all serious about our work. But I'm looking at an absolutely exquisite lake in sunshine in a peaceful environment.
I got my back to it. I got the wrong seat.
Well, then I'm guilty for sitting in the seat. But just sort of grappling with that confrontation of, I said accelerate before. I feel an urgency, but I know how important these kind of conversations and conferences are, and it's a difficult cocktail to keep inside.
Good perspective. Thanks.
For me, my ongoing question, and I try to figure out how I can support and help this, is, there's acceleration. I also think there's transformation. And transformation for me is something turning into something else that's more mature, more connected. And I feel like that's a vision for me that I see out there in terms of supporting people through transformation. There's a lot I don't know. I feel like I've woken up to the fact that trauma, as I said earlier, trauma and healing are central to systems change, and they're nowhere in the conversation. And yet I know so little about how to support a healing process. We're connecting with experts that do. But that for me is, one of the real sort of things that's keeping me up at night is our systems are in trauma, and they need to be healed. But what the heck does that mean?
And I think the thing that is blowing my mind now, and getting back to the Agenda 2030, if we can use that as sort of a conversation piece, is recognizing that this is an integrated system and that it has to be thought of that way, and that, you know, the starting premise is that none of these things will happen unless all of these things happen. Recognizing that and then actually internalizing that and operationalizing that, because the inclination in the way the SDGs, with the specific example of the SDGs, and I think in the ways human beings solve problems and human institutions solve problems, is to break it up, right? And I mean, we worked in numerous countries where the SDGs, they've been ratified. Okay, you ministry of this, that's your SDG. You ministry of that, this is your SDG. You ministry of the other thing, that's your SDG. Go solve that problem, right? So right away, the way our institutions and our way of thinking approach the problem is not going to solve the problem that's been set, which is that it's a holistic system. So I think that's what's blowing my mind. How do we begin to think more holistically? And I think all these elements that John's mentioning about sort of healing and love and a different worldview is part of that. But how do you operationalize that? I'm an engineer scientist, right? And I'm always thinking about how does that become operational? And that's what's blowing my mind.
So I'm smiling because I'm feeling the positivity in David's statement and the energy of it, and actually kind of like suddenly see the opportunity in that.
Again, I come at this from an engineering, scientific training and perspective, but we're trying to develop some frameworks to actually understand where those key intersections are, to sort of fight back against this sort of assignment of the problem to you solve this problem, you solve that problem. We just released a platform called SDG Synergies, which is a place where you can, in a collective participatory process with as many actors as possible in a specific local context, which is where the SDGs really are going to have to be implemented, say, okay, if we make progress on this SDG goal, get down at the level of the targets, not just the goals. What does that mean for this other target? And using that participatory process and some mathematical analysis behind the scenes, really identify what those key catalytic entry points are and sort of begin to build some momentum about, let's coalesce around that, because that's the one that's going to be the most impactful and catalytic as we're trying to, grapple with this huge, enormous agenda and, in a holistic fashion. So that's the way we've done it, is to try to figure out where these catalytic entry points are in a participatory process so that we can focus our energies and resources on that as part of this acceleration process and not feel so scattered and fragmented.
What are the questions that need asking right now?
As somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about systems, one of the things that we've sort of, we had to give a name. I give names to a lot of different things. And one of the things we all observe it is what we call system snapback. So systems stretch. They'll stretch as people sort of try to get them going in a certain direction. And then shit happens and they snap back into place. And, we're seeing that with sort of the marriage equality movement, where all the way up to the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage was made legal, but we're seeing a system snapback on that. We're seeing it in civil rights. We're seeing it in voting rights. You're seeing this snapback. Why does that happen? Well, structures changed, but the values either didn't change or they changed back. And that's why systems snap back, because there's been inattention to the values side of the equation.
That's great.
To the power dynamics, to the mental models, and to the relational connections that exist in the system. And so I think the question we need to be asking now is, when we see, these things that at least some of us hold dear, like civil rights, et cetera, when we see them under attack, there is a systems way to look at that and say, what's going on? I mean, I'm sort of concluding around, not just me, but me and my colleagues, that we talk a lot about, we've got to set goals, we've got to set the SDG goals. I think in systems change, it's more important to think about how you shift values than how you head to goals. And that, to me, is what we need to have more conversation about.
Do you need to make sure that the whole value system is correctly aligned before you try to engage in this higher level change, or is it a back and forth?
I think it's a back and forth, but I think what's missed often is that people just go immediately to the structural change of policies, practices, and resource flows. And they don't think about these deeper values and mental models and norms. And I mean, to take marriage equality, the first round of sort of trying to shift things there is they came out with a very rational argument that same-sex couples should have the same rights, legal rights, as opposite-sex couples, and that fell completely flat. They came back and they regrouped and they said, well, we've got to come up with a frame, a different mental model that will work for people, and that's where they came to, two people in love should have a right to get married, which became called Love is Love.
But the legal decision was based on an argument about constitutionality and...
Yeah, but the values, when they were trying to actually get that message out there, they literally went door to door and had conversations with people. They didn't go, knock, knock, door opens, and they didn't say, let me give you 5 facts why, we should have marriage equality. They just had conversations. They literally had conversations with people and said, do you know anybody who's gay? Well, yeah, actually, my nephew's gay. Oh, really? Tell me about that. And they had really interesting conversations. And in those conversations, they got into relationship. And the person, all of a sudden, they didn't even have to say, they got to the end of the conversation, the person said, I actually think, I was against, sort of same-sex marriage, but now we've had this conversation, I actually think we should, So, that's the potential power. So it was going through that values-based work that allowed them then to, we can call it was based on a legal decision, but there's always a lot of stuff going on.
So why, but it was apparently insufficient to avoid snapback.
No, we're definitely in a state of snapback, and I am not part of the movement. I have great respect for what they did, but I think there are some that within the movement that said, it was white males that were basically driving that they were more respectable and that they looked good, and that, transgender, BIPOCs, that the backlash has, that there never was any value shift there. It was fine to have the 2 white men.
Professionals.
Yeah, professionals. But for other more marginalized populations, they actually didn't benefit, they ultimately benefit by the law, but there was not a value shift that took place there. That's what I'm told.
Can I ask you a question, Tate?
Yeah.
Just curious, listening to this conversation, what are our blind spots?
I'm totally engaged right now. I love this. I think that we don't have enough time to, of course there's blind spots because we don't have a week or a year to talk about this, or a decade. We brought it up earlier, the blind spot of us all being guys on this podcast. There's not a lot of diversity in color. Sometimes
I'm representing, come on.
Yeah, I said there's not a lot. The dish, though, kind of depends where we're at in the world. When we're in Montana, sometimes it's pretty homogenous. There was a good effort, though, that Hatch did. They did a diversity audit, and they ended up, the last hatch in Montana, I think they had like 40% BIPOC, and it was described as the first time they had been in community together as opposed to like a token representative, and I loved that kind of theory. You actually segued kind of into my next question is, what's more important, social change or legislative change?
Should we just all say yes at the same time?
Exactly. There are structural changes that need to happen, like legislative, and then there's cultural change, value shifts, just as we've been talking about. And there's an interplay between the two. And I think we're in a world, well, I'll call sort of the Western mainstream world, is overly focused on the structural legislative change. And then we get into situations like we just talked about where we get snapback, and if you don't shift those values. But I think for a lot of people who have been oppressed for so long, values take a long time to change. And so it's like, shit, we don't have time for that. We've got to change the legislation. We've got to change the structure. And so at the end of the day, it's a tension that nobody knows which to do when, and the context is always going to be different. Really seriously spending time on relationships and values is core to this work. And it's why I do worry with the SDGs, because I feel like that's kind of discounted and underappreciated in the process. And everybody feels, the sense of urgency has gone up. And that is really important. But then we can end up in work avoidance by doing work. Ron Heifetz developed adaptive leadership, talks about this the notion of work avoidance, that you're under so much stress, you just start doing something that you can do about it instead of dealing with the real core of the problem. And, the systemic causes of our problems are not technologies. And structure is a really critical aspect, but it needs to be, considered along with sort of the culture of the system.
Well, working for an organization whose motto is bridging science and policy, I would probably say that, my first instinct would be the legislative solutions. But this conversation is really important because I think it really is pointing out how both of these things have to happen in parallel and at the same time with equal urgency. Sometimes one might be more important than another. A lot of it's context specific. But I think we also need to be gracious with ourselves, is that we're all good at certain things, and be respectful of the people who are trying to move the values part, while at the same time being respectful and collaborative with the people who are trying to move the legislative part. We all have our skills and talents, and I think really a big part of the secret sauce is going to be collaboration and participatory collaboration.
Dave, I have another blind spot. The SDGs being created, or even the UN being created post-World War II, Western white culture.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, if you're going to go all the way, reel it all the way back to that, I mean, that's an organization and it's an institution that is just a manifestation of white male power, right? I mean, and all of the institutions that were set up in that time after the war were from that period. So now that's not to say that the institutions can't evolve, right? And I think they probably have. The UN probably operates differently and honors more voices than it did in 1945. But still, the institution itself came from that moment.
This is kind of a speed round. Slow pace of democracy or dictator for a day?
I mean, that just sounds like too much fun to pass up a dictator for a day. I mean,
but then we'd have snapback.
Yeah, it wouldn't last. So
unintended consequences is like snapback.
Slow pace of democracy that actually works, as opposed to the democracy we have.
I would go with that, slow pace for democracy.
Whose reality will rule the future?
Tate, these were the quick ones.
God, yeah. Oh, wow.
Beyonce's reality.
Beyonce, ooh, good one.
I don't know. I think, we've had some spirit people on this planet, like Gandhi and Dr. King, and I think they have shown us the way, and I think my wife and I, are always saying that the children and youth of this generation, there are more old souls than, there have been, and I think by necessity, somehow more old souls are being born, and I think it's going to be people like Dr. King and Gandhi who we'll see more of them, and they'll help to show the way.
What brings you hope right now?
Along with our selfishness and our greed, we are an incredibly creative and ingenious animal. And as much damage as we've done, I think we can create a beautiful future.
I'm 60 years old, turned 60 this year, and so what gives me hope is that the dominant narrative when I was 15, 20 is not the dominant narrative at age 60. And I think that social change is a slow, messy, somewhat random process, but it happens. I'm optimistic and hopeful that the narrative is heading in the right direction and it's starting to accelerate.
Somebody said recently to me that things aren't getting worse, they're just getting uncovered. I think in that uncovering, there is a shift in consciousness that's going on right now in the world. It's the biggest shifts are, frankly, among, the global north and people who are privileged. But there are new recognitions of sort of equity and that we need more equity and justice in this world and actions that are being taken. And, ultimately, humankind, we're relational beings. And the good news about technology, social media, all that stuff is it does put us more in relationship than we used to be. I think the world's going to get worse. The world's going to get warmer, but it's going to cause us to just be aware of things differently.
You guys are a wealth of knowledge. Oh my gosh. This is the Hatch podcast series. We're in Mexico. John, San, and David, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tate.
Thanks, fun.
Thanks, John. Thanks, San.
If systems change is about shifting the conditions that hold the problems in place, as John Kania arguably asserts, Then, transforming the systems that no longer serve begins with why. Why was a system created in the first place? Or, in more exacting terms, who benefits from a system's success and who suffers from its demise? Once these invisible stakeholders are identified, the structures, beliefs, and behaviors, whether naturally derived or intentionally constructed, holding any given system in place becomes easier to define and dismantle. Business is, after all, business. As is evidenced in the recent momentum behind electric vehicles, EV. Money talks. As soon as viable alternatives to old money paradigms become fiscally sound, the giants of industry move in for their piece of the pie. Opinions change, behaviors follow, and anew. Albeit questionably sustainable, normal evolves. Simple. But are these innovative new systems merely more of the same? Electric vehicles may provide a neatly wrapped narrative of success. We're replacing an environmentally destructive mode of transportation with a zero-carbon iteration that makes consumers feel good about doing their part to save the planet and keeps those industrial giants' pockets full. But what of the places where those minerals necessary for the electric vehicle's batteries being mined? How are those communities faring socially? What is the environmental impact of this extractive industry? The examples of electric vehicles is a telling one. If the system is replaced with one based on the same worldview, the same system model, the same exhaustive need for bigger and better, we snap back, recreating the system, this time in sheep's clothing. If we want meaningful, accelerated impact, we need a way to connect market systems and human behaviors, says San Rahi. We need to look at the systems controlling the macros around us to determine a meaningful intersection of those operating systems. These relationships, as well as those between distinct and diverse individuals, perspectives, countries, and constituents, are more important than the sum of their parts. Things that seem conflicting all of a sudden coalesce into a beautiful dance. In this relational communion is the empathy and experiential fascia connecting all of the parts into an integrated whole, a whole community, a whole human family, a whole world. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlin. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Allison Gregory, Kevin Hilton, Roy Chapman, Eli Kisko, Raymond Onsatagi, Sean Mackinson, Robert Edwards, and Mark Groner. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Josie Caton, Eitan Shapira, Cassidy Seckman, Bryant Stersala, Rachel Hicks, Katie Yam, and Lou Morris. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch volunteers, board of directors, Hatch guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.